Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of the 1871 podcast. Now, Johnny, we know there's not much good news to report at the moment as far as Reading FC is concerned, but we've got some exciting news to announce because the 1871 podcast now has a YouTube channel. Hooray!
Hooray.
We're coming into the 21st century. Is it 21st century? Yeah, I
We're
think.
in the 21st, everyone else is in the 22nd.
Yeah. So obviously, if you're already watching this episode on YouTube, you already knew that. But for those of you who are listening to the audio podcast and you didn't know, all of our Series 2 episodes are now on YouTube. And you can find them very simply by going to YouTube and searching for 1871 podcast. So for listeners and viewers now of a certain age, it's a little bit like, I don't know if you remember this, Johnny, when Radio 1 DJs used to go on top of the pops. So, Johnny, you can be Simon Mayo. I can be Steve Wright. And the only one I can think of with Dylan Kerr is he could be Kenny Everett.
Yeah. I'm glad you picked wisely with this choice.
I know. Let's not go there. Let's not go there. But anyway, so you're Simon Mayo, I'm Steve Wright, and Dylan is Kenny Everett. And yes, no more said about that. So anyway, search for 1871 podcast on YouTube if you want to have a look at the 1871 podcast YouTube channel. So our guest tonight is Reading FC head of commercial, Tim Kilpatrick. But before we speak to Tim, as you might know, yesterday's 1871 podcast episode was our Reading FC quiz. So that was available from yesterday, Sunday. And some of you have been sending in your scores. And very impressively, some of the scores have also been accompanied by photos as evidence that the score is accurate. So obviously we have to trust people. But I can now announce our current leaderboard. So, Johnny, you were top of the leaderboard to start with, although that had something to do with the fact that you were going first.
Minor details.
So you were top. No bones about it. You were top of the leaderboard even to start with. But your lead didn't last that long. A few hours, I think it was.
Oh.
So what I'm going to do is I will read out our current top three on our 1871 quiz leaderboard. And all of our top three have scored more than 30 points out of 50. So in third place, with 32 out of 50, is Alex Blissett and family, because Alex got his son Alfie and his dad to help. So in third place, with 32 out of 50, is Alex Blissett and family. In second place, with 38 out of 50, is our co-host Johnny Hunt. And I didn't deduct Johnny any points for not being able to add up his score at the end. I did that. I listened back and he did get 38 out of 50. So well done, Johnny. You were in first, but you got knocked out into second place by our current leader, who is Chris Bennett, a Reading fan, of course. And Chris has got 39.5 out of 50. And what we've done, we've given Chris half a point for one of his answers, as he gave the correct surname for a player, but he couldn't remember the first name. He's got a question mark there. So we thought half a point was fair. So 39 out of 50 for Chris Bennett, who is our leader. So that's our top score, 39.5 out of 50. But do you think you could do any better? The quiz is still available on our previous episode, which is now also available on YouTube. So you can watch it if you want. So why not have a go, see how you get on, and let us know your score. So before we speak to our guest this evening, we're going to take a look back at another defeat for Reading and a second 1-0 defeat at home, this time against Millwall. And that was a repeat of the same scoreline in the same fixture last year. So that's 3 defeats in a row, no goals scored in that time, not too many shots on target either, which is a bit worrying. So here's how that leaves things in the championship table. Reading are currently 16th with 44 points, but of course we're expecting that 6-point deduction, which as things stand would leave Reading 1 place and 6 points above the relegation zone. Now, I still think we're going to be safe. I will say that. I'm not changing my mind just because we've lost 3 games in a row. So we're if we get the 6-point deduction anytime soon, then we would be 1 place and 6 points above the relegation zone. So there's 10 games remaining for everyone. Reading on 38 points after the deduction, and the bottom 3, Blackpool, Huddersfield and Wigan, are all on 32 points. And that's a far cry, Johnny, isn't it, from a few years ago, Reading v Huddersfield in the playoff final. Things have changed for both clubs since then.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's look at the form, because I think that's fairly key. So the form over the last 5 games is 3 points for Reading, 3 wins and 4 defeats. But Blackpool and Huddersfield and also Wigan, fairly close in terms of form. So Blackpool and Huddersfield have 4 points from their last 5 games. Wigan have 2 points from their last 5 games. So you'd probably say Wigan are favourites to go down, I think. So if that form continues until the end of the season, so that's a form over the last 5 games, there's 10 games to go. So if that form continues for those 4 teams until the end of the season, that leaves Reading on 44 points, Blackpool and Huddersfield will be on 40 points, and Wigan on 36 points, and Reading stay up. And also Reading's form over the last 4 games is better than the bottom 3. So Reading have got 3 points over the last 4 games compared to 1 point over the last 4 games for all 3 teams in the bottom 3. So trying to put a positive spin on it here, Johnny. You know,
yeah, it's very positive. That's like, you could I don't know, you could be a very good salesman after daily. But I think as well, there's rumours again of points deductions for Wigan because they didn't pay wages, and then also rumour again Huddersfield points deduction of possible administration by Thursday. Again, it's all hearsay, it's all whatever, but it's just a bit of a mess, really, as for football clubs in general.
And Burnley as well. Obviously, not affecting where Reading are going to finish, apart from the fact I think we've still got to play Burnley, haven't we?
Yeah, they've got a transfer embargo, and I think Huddersfield's the same. But what's the point of that? They can't do transfers anyway over this time of the season.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Just to make a point again, typical football league stuff.
I think so. I think you might have a point there. Well said, Johnny. So look, let's talk about Saturday's game. Another home defeat. And Paul Ince came out after the game. I don't mean Paul Ince came out after the game, but you know what I mean. Paul Ince said after the game that apart from one mistake, there was nothing between the 2 teams. But the stats and the fans that were there at the game would say otherwise. So yes, actually there was more possession for Reading, but 6 efforts on goal for Millwall, only 2 efforts on goal for Reading, and nothing on target. So Paul Ince has said he doesn't think Reading have the quality that the other teams have in the Championship. In a way, he's got a point, Johnny. Do you sort of go along with that?
Yeah, but he keeps going on about it. Like, and if you're for a player's mindset, I don't know how that starts you off in a game. When somebody's telling you you're no good and you're not as good as other players, how do you raise your game? Like, I think, the old Reading of we're little Reading, when we were, fighting above our weight, we used that as a motivator to play the bigger teams. We'd go out there, we're little old Reading, but we'll take you on. And we had some great results. We didn't always win, but they went out there with a fight. And that's what's lacking. It's just, it's pedestrian. It's him. He's done okay to get us where we are, but the football we're playing is how he's talking post match. Yeah. It's just, it's very negative and no shots. I think 1 shot in 3 games is on target now. And that, home form has been good, great, but the last 2 games, it's poor.
I think the last home game highlights it on Saturday against Millwall. As I say, same result as that fixture last year, a year ago. No shots on target. 6-2 efforts throughout the whole game in Millwall's favour, even though Reading had more possession. I think it kind of sums up where Reading are at the moment. And what do you make of the of the game on Saturday, Johnny, what are your thoughts on how Reading played? Do you think Millwall were the better side? What are your thoughts?
Again, mistake for the goal. We go one down, and then Millwall are a good side. That's where they are in the league. They're good at they get the 1-0 up, and they keep the shape. They defend well, but when you don't put them under pressure, you don't try and attack. You don't really create anything. Then you're not really going to see if you're going to get a result. It played into Millwall's hands again. They can sit back and they can defend. And Ince is right to a point. Yet we haven't got the quality, creative players apart from the Sun, according to him, of course. But it's more to it than that. We were creating chances at the start of the season better. I think the way we're playing now, as I said before, with Carroll up front, it becomes a bit obvious what we're doing, and we have got other options. We have got it's clearly not working, so something different. Try it. We're losing anyway, so what harm's different going to do? Whether I said like Aziz, Jow, something else, play a different system.
Yeah, because the young players, by very definition, have got that level of energy. If you mention about Paul Ince talking about his son, but I think that's probably fair. He is the one player that is kind of standing out. But give those young players a chance. I think we might as well, because actually, I think that 3 or 4 points in our last 10 games is possibly going to be good enough to see us safe, because 38 points would have been good enough last season.
Yeah.
So it's not too much to ask for to see Reading get like 4, 5, 6 points between now and the end of the season, 10 games.
Yeah.
So Johnny, what are your thoughts about this one? This is really interesting. So there's a story. It sounds like a bit of a rumour, to be honest, that Reading are keeping tabs on Graham Murty as their next manager. So I saw somebody make a really interesting comment on social media about this. They said that we need to be careful not to get carried away about sentiment. So Graham Murty, obviously a legend, captain of the 106 side that went up to the Premier League. Yes, he's managed Rangers, but is he the right manager? I think I agree with this guy that commented on social media that you have to determine what the right type of manager is first. A bit like David Artell said when we had him on as a guest. Like, work out what type of manager you want, and then find available managers that fit into that criteria, rather than just going, oh yeah, Graham Murty. Obviously, we would be in favour of Dylan Kerr because we like Dylan. We know Dylan. He's a co-host. Yes, of course, all that stuff. That'd be great. But also, you look at his track record. He's won 7 trophies since 2007 in 3 different countries. He's taken over at 4 clubs that were in the relegation zone in the South African Premier Division, kept them all up. He's obviously doing something right. And you could say, yes, well, it's only Vietnam and Kenya and South Africa. But actually, is it more difficult to be a manager over there? I'm not saying necessarily that Dylan is the answer. I'd love to see him be manager of Reading, but this comment I saw on social media, I think is really, I think that's right. Actually, with the director of football, the scouting that's in place, which is an improvement from this time a year ago, we do have to have a mould for what the right type of manager looks like for Reading. And actually, there are arguments. There's a lot of support for Paul Ince. If he keeps Reading up, then it's job done. So what's that's kind of a long-winded way of asking you your reaction to that story about Graham Murty, Johnny.
I think first of all, you look at the last few years, we've just gambled on random managers and hoped it's worked. Going back to probably off the top of my head, Yap Stam, we came in, everyone thought, and first season did very well. Then it went down with the wayside. Since then, random names like Gomez, Pauno, they've just been plucked out, and Paul Ince at the same time, as even though he's a name, he hasn't managed for 8 years, as we know. They've got to do it differently. Like you said about Dylan, Dylan's done an amazing job. He doesn't seem to get a look in English football for whatever reason, which he deserves. Hopefully at Reading one day, hopefully that will happen. But if it's Mertz, again, is he the right man? I don't recruit football managers, but what he's got the understanding of the club, and he's got the understanding of young players. He's got the mentality, as he said on the podcast last year with us about being part of the Reading history. That's priceless as a manager. None of those other managers have had that, where they can come in and go, well, I know what it's like to play for this club and be successful. That as a leadership quality is huge. Nobody can argue with that. Nobody can say, well, you didn't, well, he did. As any other, that's it's been part of the history. Dylan's been part of the history.
Yeah.
As a new manager, it's a gamble on anyone coming in. He's had the experience of being at a big one of the biggest clubs, Rangers. He's doing a great job with Sunderland under 21s. At the minute, it has to be a plan. Like we've got Noel Hunt in charge of the under 21s. He's doing a great job. If it was Mertz coming in as the manager, if it's Dylan, if it's whoever, it has to be the right fit for the job. And that's what you were saying, that they need to plan this. And if it takes to the summer, we've identified Graham, and that's part of a process rather than this just shooting from the hip and hoping we're going to grab someone in that's going to make something happen. And it has. Obviously, the embargo and the last 3 years have been a disaster for whoever's been involved, but they still don't feel the right fit for our club. Whereas we need this one is the biggest thing now.
Because what we should say is we have no idea, if there's any truth in that story at all. It was a story that came out over the weekend, I think, wasn't it? Was it Friday?
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah.
So we have no idea if there's any truth in that at all, whether it's just a rumor. It kind of makes sense for Reading to keep tabs on other managers, because it might be that Paul Ince decides to leave at the end of the season. And the other thing to say is we have no idea whether the plan is already in place to keep Paul Ince if he stays up. But you look at, we had the Brighton and Hove Albion CEO on as a guest last year in Series 1, Paul Barber. Really interesting to talk to him because Brighton, not that many years ago, were kind of in the same position that Reading were. And went up to the Premier League and they're now kind of establishing themselves as a top half Premier League side. And Paul Barber said, we've got a contingency plan in place. We are tracking other managers because, Graham Potter might go somewhere else. And he did. He went to Chelsea. So they already know the type of manager they want to bring in. And they brought in Roberto De Zerbi because he fits the mold of the type of manager that they want. So I think that's really important.
And he's done very well.
And also, I think in Paul Ince's defence, he has got, compared to a Burnley or a Middlesbrough or a Sheffield United, he has got limited resources to work with. And yes, there's been injuries, but every club's had injuries. Yeah. I think there are Reading fans that are in support of Paul Ince. There are Reading fans that want to see him go and someone else come in. But look, let's look ahead to the next game now, Johnny. It's Blackburn away on Wednesday. 3 defeats in a row, no goals, hardly any shots on target. I think you said 1, didn't you, in the last 3 games?
Yeah.
That needs to improve. And yes, of course, we've played Middlesbrough away, we've played Sheffield United away. You would have hoped Sheffield United at home, 2 of the top sides, they both could be in the Premier League next season. It's probably going to be Burnley plus potentially one of those 2. But yeah, of course, they're really tough games. Millwall, not an easy game, but you expected more on Saturday. So what would you like to see, whether it's, the starting lineup or the way that Reading are playing at Blackburn on Wednesday, Johnny?
To me, it's a free hit. No one expecting us to go up there with our away record to get a result. So just go for it. Like, we're letting in goals by being defensive. We're setting up defensive. We're having, 5 at the back, whatever you want to win backs. Change it. Do something different. Gamble. Go, it's a no-brainer. No one's expecting us to get 3 points. So try different, play different. We're kind of predictable how we set up. Teams know what we're doing, how we set up, whether it, who's in what position might change, but the way we play is pretty defensive. So go different, play 4-4-2. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's about the approach as in the team starting, play on the front foot, attack and try put it to the opposition. Let's not be passive and sit and hope we're going to catch them on the counter attack, because we're not good enough, as probably Paul Ince, to keep clean sheets constantly, to defend well constantly, because we keep making mistakes. Whoever's making the mistakes, we're making them. So why rely on a nervous defence when we could actually just try and change the mindset of the fans and the team and go, right, attack.
So who would you start with? And before you answer that, Johnny, I actually like your idea of Andy Carroll coming on, especially away from home, because Andy Carroll has got a particular set of skills, like Liam Neeson in the Taken film series. But it's true, isn't it? He can come on and make an impact. He's not the player he used to be. The same is true of Shane Long. Obviously, everyone was really happy that Shane Long came back, but they're not as good as they used to be. So why not bring those players on to make an impact, and start with somebody like Femi Aziz and a few of the other younger players, and actually then you've got a game plan where you're already kind of game managing before the start of the game. So for the first hour, this is what we're going to do, and then we can bring Andy Carroll on, and then tactically maybe we've got some set pieces, and then maybe we play to try and win corners or something. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying
and we've been playing that way for quite a number of games now, and it is predictable. So change, and there's a young lad, was it a briefer that played in the cup game for Watford, who had a very good game at right wing back. If he's fit and he's.
So who would you start, Johnny? Who would you start if you're in Paul Ince's shoes? I don't know if he has got the same size shoes as you, but if you are in his shoes, you're picking the team. Who starts?
Obviously, goalie picks himself. Then you've got limited choice at the back. Again, it depends on injuries, because I think we picked up a few again on Saturday. I think Yeardom possibly could be injured, so I'd say a briefer if he was fit. Then it's the rest pick themselves. Holmes, Sarr, and Liam Moore probably. That's who's available if Tom McIntyre's injured. We're lacking in central midfield. I'd give Forner a go. Obviously, Hendricks played all season, will play again with it alongside Ince. Then you've got, as I said, give Aziz and Jow a go. Why not? If Jow's leaving in the summer, is he playing for a new deal somewhere? Aziz is young, hungry, give him a go. Then you've got, a couple of the young lads in the under-21s that, the young, very long name. Kelvin, it's got a very long name. Elva, I can't even pronounce it well, but he's come off the bench a couple of times. A different option. Give the youngsters a go. That's what at the start of the season worked well. We had a very limited sort of 16, 17 players, but give it a go.
So now, eventually, after all of that, it's time to welcome our special guest, Tim Kilpatrick. Thanks for joining us, Tim. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No, you're very welcome. We really appreciate you being on as a guest. Obviously, head of commercial at Reading, so we wanted to ask you all about that. And Tim, you're the current Reading FC head of commercial. We'd love to hear about your role, but I'm going to bring in Dylan Kerr now because he's just joined us. So, Dylan, we've been talking about the current form for Reading. Obviously, 3 defeats in a row. If we get that 6-point deduction, we're getting a bit closer to the relegation zone. So, a few nervous Reading fans, to say the least. What's your take, Dylan, on the current situation with Reading. Do you think we're going to be safe, or what do you think needs to happen?
Well, you need to change the mentality of the players for one. I don't know. From just reading the latest tweets, obviously, I've got Reading fans on my Twitter, and the new word on the street is they want Graham Murty, and there's reports and whatever. But when you're not winning games, everybody looks for answers. Can they blame the board? Do they blame the club? Do they blame the manager? Do they blame the players? And they've got to figure this out. There must be some common ground now, because it's an important part of the season. I think Huddersfield are going to get a transfer embargo. Burnley with a transfer embargo as well. I believe Huddersfield are in dire straits. If they get this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if they get these points deductions, they will be relegated. So Reading have, the rumour to be again 6 points deducted. They don't need that at this time of the season, and especially when April's coming. It's only a month away that they've got their Easter fixtures where they come thick and fast. And if you're not in a winning mentality, losing games becomes a habit. And that's now something that Reading have got to get out of, that mentality of losing games. And it's down to the management. At the end of the day, you can blame the chairman, you can blame the secretary, you can blame the commercial manager. I'm only joking. You can blame anybody, but at the end of the day, at a football club, you're responsible for the running of that club. And we've spoken about it before. Maybe Paul should look at bringing some youngsters in and freshen it up and giving these senior players a bit of a fright. Because there's nothing worse being a senior player and knowing that there's a 19, 18-year-old, 20-year-old that's champing at the bit to get a game, and then he gets the game, and all of a sudden now he's producing results and he's producing performances. So, yeah, it's a frightening situation, because at the end of the day, being in the Championship's better than being in Division 1, and once you start going down, it's very, very hard to come back up unless you're Burnley or Norwich.
And Dylan, before we speak to Tim about his role as head of commercial, just want to ask you briefly about Marumo Gallants, your team. Tough game for your team tomorrow, away to Cape Town City, who are currently in fifth place. Are you feeling confident that you can get something from that game? And how are you feeling in terms of your latest mission of keeping yet another team up in the South African Premier Division? Look,
it's going to be tough, because they've had quite a rest. They've had a break, which might be better for us, really. But the spirit in the camp is absolutely fantastic. Our problem is converting the chances that we create. And I'll give you an example. When we played TS Galaxy last weekend, we had 17 attempts at goal, and not one of them went in. It was just unbelievable. It's like they had a shield across the goal that every time it was goalward bound, it got deflected, it hit the post, it hit the side net. Everything just didn't happen for us. And then Stellenbosch played them in the cup yesterday and beat them 6-3. So they had a better day than what we did. But we've got the CAF game coming up in Libya on Sunday. So from Cape Town we go to Joburg for 2 days, and then we fly to Libya, which apparently is going to take us 24 hours to get to Damascus. But the priority is the league. So we're down here against a very tough team. Eric Tinkler's the coach at Cape Town City. It's been hot and cold this year, but they're always difficult to beat here. And we're playing in the what I think it's called the FNB Stadium. No, it's not. It's not called the FNB. DHL Stadium, which is the World Cup Stadium. So that's always good for the players. But apparently the field's not the best because they play too much rugby on it. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so Dylan, good luck for the next two games. Come back to Tim now. Tim, obviously, we all know tricky run of form for Reading. One win in the last 5 games, I think it is. 3 defeats in a row, no goals. Blackburn away next. What do you make of the current situation that Reading are faced with, Tim?
I think that, first of all, obviously my area of expertise isn't what happens on the pitch, but I think given what obviously our expectations were at the start of the season, everyone knew it was going to be a very tough season. And obviously flew out the blocks and, really exceeded what we were expecting. And the position we're in now in the table is better than we would probably have thought we would be. So I think if you said to most fans at the start of the year, this is where we are come March, whatever the date is, March, early March, most fans would have taken it. I think, it's starting to be a bit visible now. Obviously, the why we expected it to be a tough season, and I think that for everyone, if we just got to pull together, and we need the fans behind us every step of the way, to be honest, to get ourselves over the line. So I think that's sort of where I think we are, and these next 10 games are going to be crucial.
Dylan, I know you want to come in, but I just want to say this for our listeners and also anyone watching on YouTube. At this stage, I would like to mention that anyone hoping we're going to ask Tim for the latest news about the 6-point deduction, the situation with the EFL, unfortunately, we're not going to do that, because I was actually chatting to Tim before this episode, and as Tim says, as head of commercial, he's not actually involved in that situation. So he knows as much about it as we do, really, in terms of what's happening. And I know, Tim, you'd be happy to talk about that if you could, but you can't because you don't know. So
I know as much as you guys.
Yeah. So Dylan, I know you're keen to come in and ask something to Tim. Go on.
Hi, Tim. You all right?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Some commercial department, because we didn't have one back in the 90s.
Well, it's not a huge one now.
We had Mike Lewis, we had Jackie, and we had Rabbit's missus, and I can't remember Rabbit's missus' name. I'm so embarrassed. Jane. We had Jane. That was it.
Jane.
Rabbit.
Okay. I remember Jane, but I can't remember her surname either.
No, it was Jane Rabbit. You were Rabbits, weren't it?
Oh, okay.
So you said, and this is what you said. It was, you knew it was going to be a tough season. Is that because of the things what were happening? Why did everybody expect it to be a tough season and you've not even kicked off yet?
I think the parameters the club was under from a transfer perspective. We had 9 first team players at the start of the season for pre-season for the management and the recruitment team to build a team which was competitive in this division was quite an achievement. And I personally think if you look at the job they've done in getting people through the door, given the EFL's restrictions were under, they've done an incredible job.
I didn't.
So yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
so that's something that I didn't know. That's why I said. That's why I had to ask that question, because maybe a lot of Reading fans may know that, but maybe 1 or 2 Reading fans like me, I actually didn't know there was only 9 people there, and the recruitment and everything what was happening. So yeah, so I kind of understand now, and you're right where you've got yourself at the start of the season, and where you are now. It doesn't seem a bad where to be. Through what you've just said. So yeah, well done.
Tim, I've got 2 questions for you, and we want to talk to you about your role, but in terms of Reading's season at the moment, the first question is this season about getting to the end of the season, staying up, and then kind of regrouping? So that's my first question to you, and then secondly, one question I'd like to ask you, because I've done your role with Maidenhead United. I was commercial manager at Maidenhead United, so I know a little bit, obviously different context, but I know a little bit about what this is like. One thing I'm really interested in is, in terms of current run of form, when the team is not doing well, and everything that's going on off the field, does that make your job more difficult, or do you just think it's business as usual? So the first question, if you can answer that one first, if that's okay, is it a case of let's get to the end of the season and then we can start again?
I think it is at that point, because this is just me as almost a football fan talking. It's not looking like the playoffs are in reach for us. So clearly the club is pivotal that we stay in this division. So it's critical that we stay in this division. So it is a case of getting to the end of the season and seeing where we are, and sort of restocking and going from there and getting ready to go. I think, At the same time, I know obviously when the club started out at the start of this season, whilst it was a very difficult challenge ahead of us, and I think most fans were aware that this could be a difficult season. I don't think the expectation internally was just to survive. The club wanted to be competitive. I think if you look at the personnel that we have, be that the manager, be that the director of football, they're not going to just settle for a relegation battle. They want to be as competitive as possible and push as high up the league as they can. So I think they will go into every single match giving their all. And I don't think it's wise for any team to start looking, okay, look, 10 matches down the line, 9 matches, where are we going to be? We've got obviously a really difficult game away at Blackburn on Wednesday, and we need to try and get something out of the game.
And Tim, I'm going to bring Johnny in a second, but just to say that we know that Dylan is in South Africa and they have what's called load shedding over there. So if we lose Dylan at any point, that'll be why. It's to do with electricity. But it sounds odd, but that is the case. So Tim, you mentioned Blackburn there. Obviously, it's been a poor run since the win against Blackpool, which obviously was a really key victory for Reading, given where Blackpool are in the table. What, as a Reading fan, and or as somebody who represents the club, what would you like to see at Blackburn from Reading? Because that's going to be a tough game, isn't it?
Yeah, it is going to be a tough game, given where they are on the table. And though that said, when we played them at our place, we absolutely put them to the sword. And I think that came from, that was a brilliant night and probably one of the best atmospheres I've seen since I've been at the club. It was, and that's something that we should take heart from. We can beat anyone on our day. I think we've lost the last 2 games that we've lost. Let's take away Middlesbrough. But the last 2 games that we've lost, the players have put everything in and we've come up just short. And I don't think it's a case of lack of effort. I don't think it's anything like that. We've come up just short. And if we keep putting in performances like that, we'll pick up points, that's for sure. So I think, and knowing the players and knowing the management, knowing their attitudes, they'll absolutely go there and give it everything. And look, we see in this division week in, week out, anyone can beat anyone. And there's no reason why we can't go up there and get a result.
And just coming on to your role now and going back to my previous question, does it, is your role easier when the team is doing better on the pitch and you haven't got this stuff off the pitch? Does it make your job more difficult when you're in this kind of run of poor form on the pitch, or do you just carry on as usual?
No, I think working in football is, and I think sport generally, actually, there is an element of just rolling with the punches, because you never know what's going to happen on Saturday. I can't control what happens on the pitch, and you can't. It's very difficult to plan because of that, because you do need to be reactive to it. As an example, there are certain things in terms of marketing that, given that we've lost a couple of games, it's probably right that you don't go, pushing those in people's faces, because it might look a bit odd. You will, and whether that's when you're talking to potential sponsors or things like that, people want to sponsor a winning team. And the most important thing is when the team does well, people want to come and watch the team. And obviously when results aren't so good, it's not quite as, we do see an impact on our attendances. So it does make a big difference. Naturally, I wouldn't say winning's the solution to everything, because it's not, but it does have a big impact on us commercially. But in terms of my job, I can't rely on that, if that makes sense. So I try myself not to get too, whilst you do kick every ball with the players because it massively impacts your everyday life, I try my best not to get too bogged down in sort of our, what we're doing strategically, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis based on whether we've won or not. So it's a difficult question to answer, because it's sort of yes and no. But yeah, hopefully that sort of gives you a bit of insight.
Yeah, and just really asking you now to talk a bit about your role, how it all works. I think probably people get an idea of what head of commercial would do. I guess it's a fair bit different from the perception. So do you want to describe what the key objectives of your role are to start with?
Yeah, I think I'm interested what you think what the perception is now. I know you said that, but I think ultimately for my role is to try and drive the club's major revenue streams. Now we have that's not all just on me. We have obviously our ticketing team and our CRM team and our media team but my role is really to try as best as possible to try and shape and lead our commercial plans and try and drive money into the club. Now that can sound a bit crass because I'm certainly not someone who'll ever call our fans customers because they're fans and there's a big difference. But at the same time, you have to think financially, you have to think commercially because every penny that we generate goes straight back into on the pitch trying to make the team better. So yeah, I think my role, I joined the club in January 2019. And I think since then, it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride because obviously a lot's happened during that period with COVID and everything like that. And obviously what's happened on the pitch during that time. But so my role has definitely changed over that time. I mean, when I first arrived at the club, I sort of arrived at a time when there'd been a bit of an absence of a commercial department. So there was a little bit of firefighting when I arrived to be honest. And then since then, I've obviously grown, we've got a solid foundation and we've grown to be quite successful commercially. Certainly, if you look at other clubs in the league, we'd be as competitive as any of them in terms of certainly when it comes to like our commercial like sponsorship and things like that. So yeah, look, it's a great place to work. It's every day is a different day. And I will also say that we don't have a huge team like maybe people might expect. I think sometimes people think there's a huge team behind the scenes. We don't have a huge team, but we actually have really good people who work really hard. And yeah, no one says that's not my job, which is a really positive thing.
Yeah, Johnny, I'm going to bring you in now. What do you want to ask Tim?
Yeah, I was going to say, you touched on there, Tim. How difficult was it? I mean, you just started the club with COVID, and that time working through that. In fact, impacted on everyone in every world and careers. But from a footballing point of view, and trying to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm really honest, Johnny, so pretty much the entire club was furloughed during when COVID hit. So I was probably off from March until I think August. I came 1st of August. I was back. So obviously our major revenue generators just disappeared overnight in terms of season tickets and or gate receipts. So the club was heavily, it was a crisis period for every football club and all, the sporting industry as a whole. And you see what rugby's going through now; it hasn't really recovered yet. So it was really difficult, and I think there were times when the club, before like the operation Project Restart it was called, wasn't it? Before that came into place, the club would have had maybe 2 or 3 people working, just manning the phones because there was genuinely no need. And I think the phone wasn't ringing because everyone else was stuck indoors and knew they couldn't go out. And we tried to keep our retail operation going. And that was one aspect of revenue that we could drive. But apart from that, until Project Restart happened, where we could then start, selling your Royals TV passes and things like that, there was very little going on in terms of revenue generation. We did try a few.
In there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, Dylan.
Sorry.
No, do you want to come, Dylan? Do you want to come back in now? What do you want to ask Tim?
Yeah, no, Tim. So I mean, look, I mean, when I was at obviously when we're talking back at Elm Park, but even when I've come down to the Medeski, when I've come down to that, I mean, it's an amazing ground.
No, it's not. It's not the Medeski anymore.
Listen, you're not going to change it for me. It's the Medeski.
Okay.
Not to you, but to me, it's the Medeski.
I get that, of course,
known as Select Car Leasing Stadium.
Yeah.
Well, like I say, it's I'm old school, and like I say, when I'm down there and I do come and see the games, which unfortunately it's not as often as I could do. It's always on an hospitality side, it's always top class. I mean, the function suites, the sponsors' rooms, the supporters' rooms. I could spend all day there, and I have to steel myself to go into the chairman's lounge, for 5 minutes just to see Sir John. Maybe, there's a lot of people have left now. So, but it's always, the club's always been vibrant, from a supporters base that people still go. And I agree with you. The field's successful. If they're successful on the field, they'll be successful in the stands, and people will buy into that. And I mean, God forbid, it all goes pear-shaped for Reading. I don't think it will. I think, like I say, I've got to believe in what Paul Ince is doing because of his character as a player. And I just hope that he can change that. But, you must feel pleased and, the way that the commercial side and the way that you work with groups in and around Reading and out with Reading as well.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you say there, Dylan. I think the club, I've been at the club 5 minutes really compared to, first of all, some of the people that work there and obviously and just generally with the history of the club. But even for myself coming in relatively new, it's almost 4 years now, but the club is like a family. And when you see, club legends like yourself, Dylan, or any former ex-players that will come back or ex-members of staff that will come back, everyone's very welcoming and it feels very friendly, I think, for the stakeholders of the club to be, that they're part of something. It's not just about the right here, right now and what happens on the pitch. It's about, the 150 years of history of the club. Obviously, that's not a plug for your podcast, but and that's something even for myself, as I say, as a new person coming in, you spot that straight away. And I will say the people that have been there a long time, obviously current staff members like Jackie Evans, Ray Booth, Sue Hewitt, Brian Stabler, who've been with the club a long time, but also, when I arrived, Sir John was no longer chairman, but he's been incredibly supportive to me in my role. Gone out his way, I would say, to try and help the club commercially and try and open doors for us. And obviously as well, Nigel Howe, who was the CEO when I arrived, and he's still supportive now in his current role.
And Tim, you mentioned you were curious about what I said about the perception. Actually, the way you described it was probably exactly how people perceive that.
Right.
I think I meant, there's a lot more to it than people might expect. So with that in mind, could you talk through some of the initiatives to engage with the fans, to engage with the community? Because I know, for example, you've got a partnership with the University of Reading called Show Your Stripes. So what are some of those ideas and initiatives that you've got in place to engage with the fan base and also the wider community? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, in terms of making a difference in my role, if we're going to move the needle commercially for the club, we need to be, growing the fan base in terms of driving more bums on seats on a regular basis. And I think since I've been at the club, when I joined, the attendances were, not much better than what they are now. So I think there might be a slight decline. I don't think obviously COVID helped that. And I'm not saying the club can't do better, which I think we can, but I think in order to move the needle commercially for us and in the general fan experience and atmosphere and things like that, we need to start driving more people into the stadium. And my opinion on what we need to do that is to try and connect the club with the town and the community a lot more. I think in the modern world, it's very easy to be detached from what's right in front of you on your doorstep, given the accessibility to Netflix, to PlayStations, to watching Arsenal, watching Chelsea on TV, or even getting to Chelsea if you want to go and watch them live if you can. So I think it's something that we need to create emotive connections between our population and the football club. And I think we worked really hard during the anniversary season to try and do lots of activations around that, whether that be the museum, whether that be working with local schools to have Reading FC as part of their history syllabus, so kids are learning about Reading FC. And we've got stuff planned for next season as well, which so I'm not from Reading, right? So I'm from Blackpool, actually. Obviously, you mentioned them earlier, but I have this feeling that I don't know why, but I don't feel like a lot of people in Reading are proud to be from Reading, when actually, as I feel like they should be. It's an incredibly fast growing town with incredibly exciting things happening there, and I feel like we, as Reading Football Club, have a responsibility to talk about that and to try and communicate the great things that Reading is great at. We're not just Reading Football Club, we're Reading's football club. And that sort of led us on to the partnership with the university. So as an example, we'd always been aware that we needed to be better from a sustainability point of view. And I'd been talking with the university for years about ways in which we could work together, and we knew we should be working together, but we couldn't quite find the right angle. And I was actually on a Zoom call similar to what we're on now with their commercial director, and in the canvas behind him, similar to how you've got the 1871 flag there, he had this climate stripe image, and I think I made a jokey comment about it. I don't know, like a nice bit of art or something. I don't know if it was a joke, I might have been serious, but I had no idea what it was. And when he explained it to me, it straight away, first of all, I think like it does for a lot of people, resonated in terms of, oh wow, the Earth's gone, things are going bad from a global warming perspective. But secondly, when he explained the success of it, how it was visible at COP26 and was becoming more visible around the world, I felt like this again was something that our town has created. That Reading has created this, and we should be proud of that. And they wanted to reach more people and possibly different demographics. So straight away, I ended the call and I called him back up on my mobile maybe 10 minutes later, saying we've got to put this in the kits. We've got to work together. Let's put this in the kits. Let's talk about it. You can help us become more sustainable. We've taken lots of steps this season to do that. But more importantly, can we get more people talking about this? Can we get Reading fans talking about it? Can we get football fans and sports fans talking about what the world is going through? And we're incredibly proud, actually, of the partnership. It's been probably more successful than we expected it to. I think when we did the kit launches and things like that, I did say to our media guys that I think there might be some negative reaction to start with, because obviously the stripes on the sleeves are quite striking and not probably what you'd expect in a Reading kit. And I think there was to start with. I think a lot. I've screenshotted on my phone some comments on Twitter, which I don't know, I probably shouldn't repeat on here, but it was incredible to see the reaction that it got as it went further, when different media outlets picked it up, and it went almost viral, I guess, in terms of the exposure that it got. And then when we played Man United again, it got more people talking about it. So it's something that, it's not a partnership which has driven the club revenue. And this might give you a bit of insight into my role as well, because it's not something that directly is driving the club revenue, but actually, if we get people thinking that, first of all, the first objective is to try and increase awareness of climate change. But the second of all, if we, from a selfish perspective, is if we can if we can create more of a connection with what the great things that the town is doing as a football club, let's shout about them. Let's make people proud of our town, proud of our football club, and try and make a difference that way. So it sort of gives you an idea of the engagement things that we try and do. We've got similar things planned for next season.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge. Tim, if I may be so bold, I'd like to kind of slightly disagree with something that you said earlier. And obviously you coming into the town. So I think there's two parts to this. So I was born in Reading. I grew up in the Reading area, went to Reading College, etc., etc. So for me personally, I know you know, this wasn't a sweeping statement that you made, but for me personally, and I think this would apply to Johnny, it would apply to other people that were born in Reading and grew up in Reading, certainly, you know, I'm proud of where I'm from. And I think a lot of people, you know, who have either been born in Reading or have lived in Reading from a very young age would feel the same. I think possibly what's happened is there's that perception from the outside. So as somebody like yourself coming from Blackpool, maybe, you know, I do feel that there's potentially that perception of that being the case, that you said that some people who are from Reading are not necessarily proud of that. I think obviously we've had an influx of people from the outside. I mean, you came from a different part of the country, etc. Yeah. I think actually for me, and I worked for Reading FC commercial department for a while. I went out to houses with the lottery and stuff like that. Not very long, and I used to have a little stall on a Saturday selling Reading FC merchandise, and I think what I agree with you is that for me personally, Reading Football Club is part of Reading. So I feel that Reading is part of my identity, literally, because it was where I was born. It's where I grew up. It's where I think for anyone who grew up in a certain town, whether it's Blackpool or Reading or wherever, that comes with all those memories of happy times that you've had. But I think that it's probably, and I've had this experience of being in a similar role myself, it's about, you know, how can you engage those people and motivate those people to get interested in the football club? So I think that, you know, that partnership with University of Reading is going to help. And, you know, I've dressed up as the mascot and gone out in the town and all sorts of things. So we spoke to, on one of our recent episodes, we spoke to the assistant general manager and the creative director at Reading Royals Ice Hockey Club in Reading in Pennsylvania. And they talked about all these creative ideas. So do you, so you said that's the aim, but how do you think that you can, you know, kind of provide that extra motivation, especially if the team isn't doing that well on the pitch? How do you kind of see the next few years going in terms of your role and your role in helping with that engagement? I don't know. That's a very long-winded question. Hopefully you get the idea.
Yeah, I'll try and answer it as best I can. I think, you know, as I say, I can't control what happens on the pitch. And actually, Reading Football Club does some amazing work that is not even related to what happens on the pitch on a Saturday afternoon. A good person for you to have on this podcast would be Dave Evans from the Community Trust. The work the Community Trust does on a day-to-day basis, impacting people's lives in Reading and the Berkshire area, is absolutely incredible. And I personally I don't think enough people know about it. And I've said this to Dave, and I think it's their biggest challenge in terms of, you know, we need to, as a football club, make sure more people know about what's going on, and really talk about the great things that the club does. That isn't I'm sure you'll agree as fans that the football club isn't just win, lose or draw for you. And you want to know about the difference, the impact we're having, first of all, with aspects like the Community Trust, the great work going on in the academy every single day. I know we've obviously recently moved down to Category 2 status. That doesn't mean at all that the great work has stopped. It's just a title that's given. And, you know, the players that are coming into our club at, you know, 8 years old and being nurtured and being looked after in the most incredible way by different members of staff, to make sure that not only are they given the best chance possible to be, you know, professional footballers, but they're well-rounded and educated young people that for when they do reach that age. And there's a lot of really great things that happens at the club, and I think that's, my ambition is clearly, like, as you'd expect, for is to have a sold out stadium every single week, have people, our engagement at an all-time high, because things are going so great on the pitch, things are going so great in every department, but we have to do the little steps, and we have to make sure that everything that we do on a day-to-day basis is working towards that. And it is difficult, like, I'm not alone at the club that you've got such big ambitions and such vision, but then curveballs get thrown in the way, and we don't have infinite marketing budgets. We don't have we don't have a big team of people, as I've said. So we have to sort of box clever. We have to do initiatives like the grassroots schools day matches that we've done this season to try and get young people in, and then obviously going forward try and keep them. And when it comes to putting our season tickets on sale, try and make sure that we're making them as attractive as possible for new fans to come, and obviously current fans to stay. And yeah, look, every single thing that we do on a daily basis is working towards that. And and really, in me saying this, I'm not even thinking about I'm not thinking pound signs when I'm talking about this. I'm just thinking about the impact it has on the club as a whole. And then naturally, if you do that, the money comes with it.
And Johnny, I want to bring you back in now. What else do you want to ask Tim?
I say, Tim, I know there's been so many good off the field initiatives this season. I know from speaking to David Park, the match day experience doesn't get talked about for people that from the autistic spectrum. There's so many things. Do you think we are really missing a big trick by actually talking more about what we do and do well as a community club, which we are, isn't it? And that's what we've always been based on. A strong community.
Yeah, I think it's not a case of missing a trick, because we're aware of it, but we also need to present it in the right way.
Yeah.
And I think that perhaps there's been a challenge at times to make sure that, first of all, the content that we're able to put together is engaging and is digestible, because our media team do a great job and try and cover all aspects of the club in the best way. But then at the same time, we've also got to recognise that tomorrow, everyone's focused on getting a result the way at tomorrow, day after tomorrow. Everyone's focused on getting a result the way at Blackburn. So you got to get those. You got to get that balance. And but it's certainly not missing a trick, but it's something that everyone's sort of aware of. We need to do a bit better, and no one's more aware of that than if we talk about the community trust. The trust know that themselves, and they've recently hired someone in a marketing department to try and make sure more people know about the great work that they do.
And Tim, you obviously sponsorship is a key part of your role, and all the Reading fans will be able to remember certain sponsors. I can remember Courage being on the front of the kit back in the 80s, and and people will have their favourite kits and they will remember who the sponsor is. But I think a question that a lot of people would like to know the answer from is, how do you go about engaging with a sponsor and actually getting a sponsor to put the name on the shirt, and the other types of sponsors, so the advertising boards around the pitch and all that sort of, how does that all come about? What's the process?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to answer, really, because there's no one way. But I think if you, as I mentioned at the start, first of all, I'm a huge football fan like yourself, Mark. I growing up, I could tell you all the sponsors on every football team across the country, and for me, that's that's how I remember shirts. Like, you talk about, I don't know, a Tottenham kit with Hewlett Packard, or with Leeds with Thistle Hotels and all that. I remember shirts in that way, and I don't know if that's what moved me into working into this industry, because I was always interested by sponsorship, and sponsorship is my background. I'd always worked in sponsorship before moving to Reading. So Yeah, similar to yourself there. But in terms of how you go about doing it, I think, as mentioned earlier, when I arrived at the club, I sort of inherited a bit of an absence in this area. We'd had Carabao for 3 years, I think, or 4 years as the shirt sponsor, but um, naturally they had a bit of a link to the former ownership of the club. And I think quite early on, when I arrived in January, quite early on it was established that they weren't going to continue. So we needed a new front of shirt sponsor by April. You need it really done by April or May, and there was nothing to pick up on. Like, it was just, there's a desk, there's your laptop, get on with it. And there's no science to it, in my opinion. It is picking up the phone. It is trying to get in front of the right people. We're very fortunate in Reading that we've got various major businesses right on our doorstep. And what we were talking about earlier, the club is seen in a very favourable way. So typically you can get a door open just by, hi, I'm Tim from Reading Football Club. Love to talk about working together. And, from there, I'm a believer, and everyone's different in terms of my industry, in terms of how they do things. I'm a believer in listening. So if you're, Select Car Leasing, what are they trying to achieve? What's your business going through? What's the big objectives at the moment? How can we try and support you on that? And the club is, personally, in Reading, I would say that we're the biggest voice in the local area. If you want someone to get your message, if you want to get your message across somewhere, the football club's a great way to do it. Because, if you look at our social media presence, if you look at the amount of people we have on a Saturday afternoon, you're not getting that any other way. So we've got a really good local reach and a local voice and local engagement. But of course, when you're on Sky Sports every so often, and you're obviously every weekend, you've got the highlights packages and everything like that, we offer a national exposure too. And it's really just about talking to people in an honest way. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty straightforward person and quite honest. And I think a lot of our clients, we've got 20 sponsors at the club, and I think they've not only bought into what our statistics are in terms of audience numbers and engagement figures and things like that, they've also bought into myself and the wider team here in terms of what we try and do, and to generally that we try and do things in the right way. So it was a case to start with of banging down doors and trying to get in front of people and explain that that I'm looking for our next front of shirt sponsor. And then as my time at the club has moved on, I've been able to build my network, certainly locally, and I'm pretty. This sounds like an arrogant thing to say, and I hope it doesn't come across the way, but I'm relatively well connected now within various different local stakeholders and local businesses, and I'd say I'm part of a few different sort of business groups and things like that. So I'm quite regularly talking with businesses on almost a very relaxed way, whilst trying to sort of twist their arm into doing something with the club. And we're always looking for new partners, but we're also, the thing what excites me now with sponsors is we want our partners to activate, and we want our partners to enhance the fan experience, and to, it's a very simple thing, but Papa John's at half time, we spoke to them and they wanted to give themselves a bit of promotion. It was a very easy way just to first of all promote their business, but second of all enhance the fan experience by giving a bit of theatre at half time. And what excites me now with partnerships, if our partnerships department, is to try and activate better and get our partners involved with the club and involved in the match day experience, not just slapping a logo on the side of the pitch or playing them on the big screen. It's about what can we do to tell their story, what can we do to build a relationship with that brand, with Reading Football Club fans, so that in the same way that you've got a relationship with Courage, in like an emotional connection, you can have that with our other partners as well.
And I just want to touch on something that Dylan said earlier. He said that he still kind of thinks of the stadium as the Medeski Stadium. I think it's accurate to say, and I think you know this, that a lot of the fans will kind of think like that. And if you think back to the League Cup, all the sponsors that the League Cup have had, you know, I think it was the Milk Cup, the Rumbelows Cup, all that sort of thing. And this is a challenge, isn't it, for sponsors? And especially, I think, with the Medeski connection and everything that happened when Sir John Medeski was involved in the club. Is that something that Select Car Leasing, you know, anticipated? Is that something that they expected? Do they kind of accept that? You know, is it a case of you just have to keep reminding people, because you see it on TV, for example, sometimes people still refer to it as the old name for the stadium. What are their thoughts about all of that stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing you've got to remember is that the two owners of Select Car Leasing, Mark and James, they're fans. So everything that, you know, we would talk about on here, they'll probably be tuning. They'll probably will tune in, and you know, so I've got to be careful what I say. But no, so they're fans, so they totally get it, and you know, clearly they're not expected. They would never expect all of a sudden everyone to stop calling it the Mad Stand and straight away start calling it the Select Car Leasing Stadium. That's just that's, you know, absolutely unrealistic. They're fans themselves, they get it. However, the exposure that comes from it, you know, not despite that, you know, conversational piece, where when you're on Sky Sports, when you're on you know, all different media platforms, and you know, we track all of this for them. So the statistics and the engagements that come with it is extremely valuable. And it's not one of those, when we sat down and had that conversation with them about the stadium naming rights, we weren't promising that all of a sudden it's just, you know, people are going to forget, you know, Medeski Stadium, because, and I should be very clear on this, that is the last thing they wanted either. You know, they're fans. They've got as much respect for Sir John as you guys have, because of what he did for the club. And you know, they actually insisted in our agreement with them that the East Stand must be named the Sir John Medeski Stand, because they felt it vital to the legacy that continues. So they're very much they're understanding of it. And you know, when I'll be honest, when the mistake has been made on Sky Sports occasionally, that isn't ideal and doesn't help us there. And you know, we've obviously had to remind Sky a few times or whatever like that, but they totally get it, and the exposure they get has been really good from it, and obviously really good for their business, because football fans are their ideal demographic of possible customers. And you know, they're massive fans. Honestly, they'll every single game. They're as emotional as all of us, and they just really want the club to do well.
Johnny, I'm going to bring you back in for one more question, and then I've got a final question for Tim before we finish. So, what would you like to ask Tim?
Yeah, Tim, what do you think more could be done in liaison with the fans, whether it's the supporters groups? I know 1871, you know, with the in the stand, that's been brilliant, isn't it? Do you see there's more potential to develop the communication and where that could take, you know, to improve the attendance?
Yeah, I think we always want to talk with fans about what's going on, and we always want to do that. I think a lot gets, you know, I'm sure, Johnny, we've been at some of these meetings together, which we have, where, you know, the fans, either the fans forums or the discussion panels that we have around more operational matters. But you know, we're always keen to do that. And you know, Club 1871 started actually just before our eyes, but what a success that's been. And we're always want to hear the opinion of fans to talk about what could be done better and what we can do better. I think sometimes when communication is thrown at us, like needs to be better communication, it tends to be on the pitch, or you know, or hearing from, you know, probably people more senior than myself.
Yeah.
And that's not always as easy as it appears, because, you know, due to different cultures and different languages. So however, it is something that I think the club's got a lot better at. since I've been at, since I've been at the club, I should say. And yeah, I think the quick answer, Johnny, is that I'm always open. I don't think anyone that knows me or anyone that knows me around the club we're always open to ideas. We if we're doing things better, it means that you guys are having a better experience, which is ultimately going to be better for us commercially.
It's certainly improved, definitely. I think we're getting there where we've been in the last few years. I think the engagement between the club and the fans is, but it's still space to go. But it's looking onwards and upwards.
I think something they should say on that is that obviously a bar was set when Sir John was the owner, and because he was so visible and so ingrained in the town and so talking to everyone, and he'd always be on the radio and always visible and talking to everyone. I think everyone knew exactly what was going on at the club the whole time, and obviously things have moved on since then with different owners and everything like that. And I don't think whilst I agree it could be better and we'd all want it to be better, I don't think we're alone as a football club in terms of what has happened typically with ownership and things like that. It's a lot more difficult now to be as communicative as maybe the club once was.
Tim, I've got I said one question, but I've got two final questions. So I'll kind of ask it in one, if that's okay. So you will be aware, I'm sure, that there has been some negativity, aimed at the ownership of the club. But as an employee of the club, what's your feeling towards the ownership? Obviously, you're going to give a diplomatic answer. We know that, but for those fans who say negative things about the ownership, how do you feel about the way the club is set up? And my second and final question is going to be for you to say, answer whether you think the club is set up to go back to the Premier League at some point in the near future, and if so, how is the club going to do that? So those two questions. So first of all, what would you say about that negativity towards the owners?
How do I put this right? I think I can only talk about my experience that I have with our owners and obviously our board and everything like that. And I think when I talk to all my peers at other clubs, and I get on very, we all help each other out at different clubs, and we all got quite a good relationship. I would say that I've been trusted to do the job and had really a lot of support. I've had a lot of support in terms of when I've given an opinion in terms of how we should be doing things or asked for support in certain ways. It's always been given. And that's certainly the case of the chief exec and various other senior management. So from my perspective, I can't really ask for much more, because the last thing you want would be, I'm sure I believe you've had, or you might have people on this podcast who maybe did the job previously. And I know it's not always been the case at the club where, perhaps people have interfered in things, and that certainly hasn't been the case. They've always been very supportive, open door, in terms of always available. And yeah, I think I appreciate from a fan perspective, they're not necessarily always that, as easy to understand that relationship because they're not as visible. But from my perspective, they've been extremely supportive, and that's all really I can ask for.
Yeah, and then the second part of that question was: is Reading set up to go back to the Premier League soon, in your opinion? And if so, if your answer to that question is yes, how is that going to happen?
I think it's really difficult for me to answer that question, because I think what is set up to go up to the Premier League. If you look at the teams who've gone up to the Premier League recently, over the past 5 years, probably most of them have just come down from the Premier League. So that task of getting to the Premier League, that promised land, is extremely difficult. And if we're honest, that's probably how the club's got into the difficult situation that it's in, because we tried so hard to chase that. I think we, as all fans will be aware of as much as me, that there's been a lot of work done behind the scenes to get right people in the right places, so that we are, when it comes to our recruitment and things like that, so that we're giving ourselves the best chance. But I know the plan is to try and do things more sustainably, rather than just throw money at it, which, look at, it's not just Reading. Many clubs in this division will tell you that doesn't work. Derby County, look at them, and where they've ended up, a huge club like Derby County, and they're in League One, as are Portsmouth, and Sunderland have only just got back. So I think I can't answer if the club's set up to go up to the Premier League. I think in many different aspects they are, but there's obviously a lot of things we need to do better. Bearwood, the training ground, is as good as any training ground in the entire country. That's been built with the vision so that we can give ourselves the best chance of nurturing our own talent, attracting the best players, not just by throwing the most money at them, by offering them the best, most holistic environment to work and train every single day. And look, football is, dependent on bad refereeing decisions, good refereeing decisions, slips, own goals, deflections. So it's impossible to say. I know some people who do my job at other clubs will talk to potential sponsors and say, we're definitely going up this year, you should sponsor us, not Reading or whoever. And I always think, how can you say that with full integrity? Because everyone would have expected Brazil to beat Croatia in the World Cup quarterfinals, but football doesn't work that way, and no sport works that way. So I'd like to think that the club is on the right path, and that we will sustainably chip away at moving up the league. And in the not too distant future, I know the idea is that we are one of those clubs that are in and around the playoffs. If you look at Luton's resources and look how they perform. They've obviously got a brilliant model there, and that's the sort of I'm not saying the Luton model is what the club's looking at, but the club wants to start having its own model, which works for us, and so that we are one of those clubs that is chipping away every single year, because those two automatic places are extremely difficult to reach now, given what's happening with the Premier League. But so that we are one of those clubs that's chipping away each year, and then maybe one year we'll put together that run of form. I'm sure way before my time, but when Steve Coppell's 106 team was it expected to be
the first game of the season? Yeah, absolutely.
So you never know, do you?
All right. Well, Tim, it's been fantastic to have you on. We could go on chatting for hours, I'm sure, but really appreciate your time. Thanks for answering those questions, and really appreciate you being on. So thank you.
Cheers, Tim.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
And we did actually, just to say, we did lose Dylan. It might be because of a power cut in South Africa, but he did disappear at some point. So thank you to Tim. Thank you to Johnny. And our next episode is tomorrow evening, where our special guest will be the former physio at Reading FC, John Fern. So great to have you listening in or watching on YouTube, and we'll say ahead of Wednesday's game, come on you Rs.